Welcome to the show. We have uh, a substantial amount of material to get through today.
We certainly do.
We're turning our attention to a collection of sources, biographies, studio logs, contract details, and some really deep historical analyses that all tell the story of one of the most, well, significant entities in music history.
It's a big one.
We are discussing Led Zeppelin, the English rock band formed in London in 1968 that, effectively changed the architecture of the music industry.
It's genuinely difficult to overstate the scale of what Led Zeppelin achieved. When you look at the raw numbers provided in these documents, they're just staggering.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
We're looking at an estimated 200 to 300 million records sold worldwide. I mean, the figures vary, but they're all astronomical.
And that's just the sales.
Exactly. They're cited endlessly as the progenitors of hard rock and heavy metal, though, as we'll get into, their musical palette was much, much broader than just high volume. But beyond the sales, it's the mythology of the band. The four distinct members, the excess, the tragedy, and of course the music that keeps them in the cultural conversation decades after they officially disbanded.
And that lineup is legendary in itself. You have Robert Plant on vocals, Jimmy Page on guitar, John Paul Jones on bass and keyboards, and of course John Bonham on drums.
It is often noted in our text that they were a band where every single member was irreplaceable.
That's a crucial point, and it was proven true by their history, wasn't it?
It was. When one member was lost, the band simply ceased to exist. Our goal today is to really move through their entire timeline. We'll look at the initial formation in the late 60s, the stratospheric rise in the 70s, the sudden end in 1980, and then the very complex legacy of reunions and archival projects that brings us right up to the present day.
Including the upcoming release of that documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin.
That's right, which is scheduled for February 2025. It's the first time they've really participated in something like this.
So to understand how this unit came together, we really have to look at the dissolution of another major band, the Yardbirds. Jimmy Page was already a known entity in the London scene before Zeppelin, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was a very, very established figure. Jimmy Page was a highly prolific London-based session guitarist in the early and mid-1960s. I mean, if you look at the liner notes of that era, he is everywhere.
On some pretty big hits.
On huge hits. Then in 1966, he joins the Yardbirds, which was a blues rock band that had already featured Eric Clapton, so it had pedigree.
And he joined as a bassist initially. That seems odd.
It does, yes. Initially, Page joined to replace their bassist, Paul Samuel Smith. However, Page was a lead guitar player by trade, and it wasn't long before he switched from bass to lead guitar.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And for a brief period, the Yardbirds actually featured a dual lead guitar lineup with Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck.
Two of the all-time greats.
Exactly. That lineup is considered historically significant because you had two of the greatest guitarists of their generation trading riffs in the same band. It was a powerhouse.
But that lineup didn't last long.
No, not at all. Jeff Beck left in October 1966. After his departure, the Yardbirds continued as a four-piece, with Page as the sole guitarist. They recorded an album called Little Games in 1967 and toured the United States extensively.
And some of the Zeppelin sound was already starting to form then, in those last Yardbirds days.
It was. It's interesting to note from the concert archives that during those final Yardbirds tours, they were already performing songs that would become staples of the early Led Zeppelin repertoire. For example, they were playing a version of Dazed and Confused.
Wow, that early.
Yes, which suggests Page already had the sonic blueprint for the new band forming in his head.
However, the Yardbirds as a unit were running out of steam by 1968.
The 1968 tour was just exhausting for them. Keith Relf, the vocalist, and Jim McCarty, the drummer, they wanted to move in a more acoustic folk rock direction.
Which is the opposite of where Page was heading.
Precisely. They eventually left to form the group Renaissance. Page, conversely, wanted to pursue a much heavier, blues-based sound. So the Yardbirds played their final gig on July 7, 1968, in Bedfordshire.
But it wasn't a clean break, was it?
No, the business side of things was complicated. They were still contractually committed to playing a series of concerts in Scandinavia.
So they needed a band to fulfill those dates. And this brings us to the recruitment process, which is a fascinating chain of connections. Page initially had grander ambitions for a specific lineup, didn't he?
He did. Even before the Yardbirds completely folded, Page had entertained the idea of forming a supergroup. His vision included Jeff Beck on guitar, himself, and from The Who, Keith Moon on drums, and John Entwistle on bass.
That would have been something else.
Can you imagine? They even considered vocalists like Steve Winwood or Steve Marriott. That project never solidified as a band, but Page, Beck, and Moon did record a track together in 1966.
Beck's Bolero.
Beck's Bolero, exactly, which also featured a session player named John Paul Jones on bass. That track is often cited as a precursor to the Zeppelin sound. It has that heavy, layered feel.
So when the reality of the Scandinavian tour dates set in, Page and the Yardbirds bassist, Chris Dreja, who's still with him at that point, started looking for a singer.
That's right. And Page's first choice was actually a singer named Terry Reid,
who I believe had a pretty great voice himself.
A fantastic voice. But Reid declined the offer to join the band. But this is where the pivotal moment happens. Reid suggested a singer he knew from a band called the Band of Joy.
And that singer was?
Robert Plant. Page went to see Plant perform at a college gig, and they apparently bonded immediately over their shared interest in American blues artists. Eventually, Plant accepted the position.
So they have their front man. Now they needed a drummer.
And Robert Plant recommended his former bandmate from the Band of Joy, a guy named John Bonham.
John Bonham wasn't immediately sold on the idea, was he? The sources say he was hesitant?
He was. Bonham was in the band. He was touring with an American singer named Tim Rose at the time and making a decent, steady income. He had offers from other established artists.
So he needed some convincing.
A lot of convincing from both Page and their soon-to-be manager, Peter Grant. But eventually, the prospect of the music and the power of this specific lineup won him over.
That just left the bass player.
Right. Chris Dreja, who had been helping Page, decided to drop out of the project entirely to become a photographer. This left a vacancy just as they were about to get going.
And this is where John Paul Jones comes in.
Almost by chance.
Almost.
Yeah.
John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page knew each other well from the London session circuit. They'd worked on many records together.
So there was a history there.
A professional one, yes. When Jones's wife heard about the vacancy, she suggested he inquire about the bass position. So Jones called Page. Page agreed immediately. He knew Jones was a world-class musician, an arranger, a keyboardist, not just a bass player.
It seems like a very organic assembly of talent, not some manufactured audition process. Not at all. It was a series of recommendations and prior connections that just happened to click into place perfectly.
So the first time all four of them played together is now part of rock folklore. It was in a room below a record store on Gerrard Street in London.
This was in August 1968. Page suggested they try playing Train Kept a Rollin', which was a jump blues song popularized by Johnny Burnett, and also a Yardbirds staple.
And the chemistry was instant.
Apparently, yes. John Paul Jones recalled in an interview that as soon as he heard John Bonham play the kick drum, he knew it was going to be great. He said they locked together as a team immediately. The power was just undeniable.
They pretty quickly went into the studio after that, didn't they?
We did. They recorded some tracks for a PJ Proby album called 3 Week Hero. The track Jim's Blues was actually the first studio recording to feature all four members together. And then they went to Scandinavia.
Billed as the new Yardbirds.
Correct. To fulfill those contractual dates. They played their first live gig in front of an audience in Gladsaxe, Denmark on September 7th, 1968.
But upon returning to the UK, they had to change the name. That couldn't continue.
No. Chris Dreja issued a cease and desist letter stating that Page was only allowed to use the new Yardbirds name for the Scandinavian dates. They needed a new identity, and fast.
And the origin of Led Zeppelin comes from that earlier supergroup idea we mentioned.
It does. Keith Moon and John Entwistle had joked that a supergroup with Page and Beck would go down like a lead balloon, which is, a British idiom for a disastrous failure.
And they just adopted that, but with a spelling tweak.
Exactly. Peter Grant, their formidable manager, suggested dropping the A in lead.
Why?
So that, as he put it, thick Americans wouldn't mispronounce it as lead. A very practical commercial consideration.
And balloon became Zeppelin.
Yes. Music journalist Keith Chadwick noted that Zeppelin brought a perfect combination of heavy and light, combustibility and grace to Page's mind. It fit the sonic identity they were developing perfectly. The light and shade philosophy was there from the name itself.
Let's talk about that business relationship with Peter Grant and Atlantic Records. In November 1968, Grant secured a deal for them that seems, quite significant for the time.
It was a landmark deal. He truly was. He secured a $143,000 advance from Atlantic Records.
And in today's money, that's right.
It's a very significant amount. But in 1968, for a brand new, untested band, It was absolutely unprecedented.
How did they land with Atlantic?
Well, Atlantic was primarily known for jazz, soul, and blues artists like Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, but they were looking to expand into British progressive rock. Interestingly, the singer Dusty Springfield actually recommended the band to Atlantic executives, which helped get them in the door.
But the money was only part of the story with that contract.
The money was almost secondary to the terms. The terms Grant negotiated gave Led Zeppelin incredible, almost total autonomy. They had the final say over album releases, tours, and importantly, the content and design of their album covers.
That's a lot of control for a new band.
Unheard of. They even formed their own company, Superhype, to handle all their publishing rights. Grant basically ensured the label couldn't interfere with their art.
Their debut album, simply titled Led Zeppelin, was recorded very, very quickly.
Incredibly quickly. It was recorded and mixed in just 9 days at Olympic Studios.
And Page paid for it himself.
He did. The total cost was around £1,782. Page paid for the studio costs himself out of his own pocket. This was a strategic move.
How so?
It ensured that the record label had no financial leverage to interfere with the music before it was finished and delivered. He presented them with a completed master tape.
And the cover with the burning Hindenburg airship, it's so iconic.
It is. It immediately communicates that idea of a beautiful disaster, that mix of heavy and light. Musically, the album was a fusion of blues and folk, but delivered with these heavy, distorted guitar riffs that were just different.
It wasn't an immediate critical smash, though, was it?
No, Rolling Stone famously gave it a poor review initially, but commercially, it was a success. It was released in the U.S. in January 1969 and in the U.K. in March. It reached number 10 in the U.S. and number 6 in the U.K. It was a significant turning point in the evolution of hard rock.
And they didn't slow down at all. They released Led Zeppelin II in the very same year.
October 1969. Led Zeppelin II sequel was recorded under very different circumstances. It was recorded largely on the road at various studios across North America while they were on tour.
You can almost hear that energy in the record.
You really can. It gives the album this frantic, raw, energetic quality. It was an even greater commercial success than the debut, reaching number 1 in both the US and the UK. This album really cemented their heavy reputation.
And it contains a whole lot of love.
It does, which became a massive hit and one of their signature songs.
And that brings up an interesting point about their philosophy on singles. They were not fond of them.
Not at all. The band, and especially Peter Grant, had a very aggressive pro-album stance. They viewed their albums as indivisible listening experiences, almost like a symphony.
So no cherry-picking tracks.
Exactly. They disliked the idea of editing tracks down for radio play or selling songs individually. In the UK, they largely refused to release singles throughout their entire career.
But it was different in the U.S.
It was. In the U.S., Atlantic Records sometimes released singles without the band's consent, which created some friction. Whole Lotta Love was one of those instances. An edited version was released, and it reached number 4 on the Billboard chart, selling over 1 million copies.
But the band's preference was always clear.
Yes. They generally preferred that you, the fan, bought the album and came to the concerts to hear the music as they intended it.
So by 1970, after 2 incredibly heavy albums and relentless touring, they took a very different approach for Led Zeppelin III.
They needed a reset. They were exhausted. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant retired to a remote cottage in Wales called Bron Iar.
I've heard about this place. No electricity.
No electricity and no running water. It was completely isolated. And this environment fundamentally shifted their songwriting for the third album.
So Led Zeppelin III came out sounding very different.
Dramatically different. It featured a much more acoustic style, heavily influenced by folk and Celtic music. The opening track, Immigrant Song, is classic heavy Zeppelin, but much of the record surprised critics and fans who were expecting another onslaught of electric blues.
What was the reception like?
It received very mixed reactions at the time because of that shift. Some of the press accused them of, jumping on the folk bandwagon. But looking back, it really showcased their versatility and their willingness to take artistic risks. It proved they were more than just a loud riff machine.
Moving into the period from 1971 to 1975, this is often considered their absolute peak.
Yeah.
This is when they became, arguably, the biggest band in the world. And it starts with the 4th album.
Released in November 1971, this album is officially untitled. It is often referred to as Led Zeppelin IV, or Four Symbols, or Zoso after Page's symbol.
Why no title?
Well, the band decided to release it with no title and no band name on the cover simply four runic symbols representing the four band members. It was a direct reaction to the press.
Pushing back against the critics.
Exactly. They were being called a hype or a manufactured success. They wanted the music to stand entirely on its own merits without the brand name attached. They wanted to see if it would sell just based on what was in the grooves.
And it certainly did stand on its own.
It's one of the best-selling albums in history. The last count was something like 37 million copies sold worldwide. It's just monumental.
And it features Stairway to Heaven,
which is a cultural phenomenon in itself. It's an 8-minute epic that builds from folk to rock. And despite never being released as a commercial single in the U.S., it became the most requested song on American FM radio throughout the 1970s. This album solidified their superstar status beyond any doubt.
With that status came a lifestyle that has become almost as famous or infamous as the music. The tours during this era were just massive operations.
They were on another level. They began traveling in a private Boeing 720 jet nicknamed the Starship.
Not just a small private jet, a commercial airliner.
A customized commercial airliner. It was modified with a bar, a bedroom, a shower, and even an electric organ. It became their mobile headquarters.
And their hotel antics are legendary.
They would rent out entire sections of hotels, such as the Continental Hyatt House in Los Angeles, which became known as the Riot House, specifically because of their presence.
And there are endless stories of excess from this period.
There are. One of the most cited incidents involves John Bonham riding a motorcycle through a rented floor of the Riot House. While some of these stories have likely been exaggerated over the years, the scale of their operation and their lifestyle was undeniably lavish and often destructive.
In 1973, they released Houses of the Holy.
This album continued their musical expansion. They were using more synthesizers and mellotron, layering the sound even further. The textures were getting more complex.
And another controversial cover.
Another one, yes. Designed by the famous design firm Hypnosis, it featured nude children climbing the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. It was controversial, and again featured no band name or album title on the front.
And the tour for this album broke records.
It did. At Tampa Stadium in Florida in 1973, they played to 56,800 fans. Now that broke the record for a single-act attendance that was previously held by the Beatles at Shea Stadium, so they were officially bigger than the Beatles in that metric.
Following this incredible success, they took another step toward independence and launched their own record label, Swan Song.
They launched Swan Song in 1974. The logo was based on a drawing called Evening, Fall of Day, by an artist named William Rimmer, depicting a winged figure often interpreted as Apollo or Icarus.
And what was the purpose of the label?
It gave them a vehicle to promote their own albums with complete control and also to sign other artists they liked, such as Bad Company and The Pretty Things. It was another major step in securing their financial and artistic independence from the wider industry.
Their first release on Swan Song was Physical Graffiti in 1975.
This was a sprawling double album. It included 8 new tracks recorded at a historic poorhouse called Headley Grange, plus 7 tracks that were outtakes from earlier recording sessions.
And how was it received?
It was a massive critical and commercial success. Rolling Stone, which had been critical in the past, referred to it as their definitive bid for artistic respectability. Shortly after its release, all 6 of their albums, the 5 previous ones, and Physical Graffiti, were on the Billboard 200 chart simultaneously.
That's just incredible dominance.
It is. They were at the absolute apex of their popularity. They played 5 sold-out nights at Earl's Court Arena in London in May 1975, which are often cited by fans and critics as some of their finest live performances ever.
But 1975 also marks a turning point. It's the beginning of a series of tragedies and difficulties for the band.
It is. The momentum starts to shift here. In August 1975, Robert Plant and his wife Maureen were involved in a very serious car accident while on holiday in Rhodes, Greece.
How bad was it?
Plant suffered a badly broken ankle and elbow, and his wife was very seriously injured. This forced the band to cancel a massive world tour that was being planned.
And that forced hiatus led to the next album.
It did. Plant had to recuperate for months, first in Jersey and then in Malibu. And it was during this forced, difficult period of inactivity that they wrote the material for the album Presence.
Presence, released in 1976, has a very different feel from the previous records. It's much darker.
It's a very intense, guitar-heavy album. Because Plant was immobile in a wheelchair for the recordings, there was less room for the acoustic textures or the complex arrangements of previous albums. It's packed with straightforward, aggressive guitar jams.
And received a mixed reaction at the time.
It did. It's a difficult album for some. Around this period, it's also widely reported that Jimmy Page began using heroin regularly, a habit that would eventually start to affect the band's live performances and their studio work.
They did return to touring in North America in 1977. And this tour set even more attendance records, but it was also plagued by a kind of darkness.
The 1977 tour was massive on a business level. They set a world record for indoor attendance at the Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan, with over 76,000 people. However, the atmosphere surrounding the band had soured considerably.
There's offstage violence.
Yes. In Oakland, John Bonham and Peter Grant were arrested after a promoter's staff member was badly beaten. There was a general sense of menace and exhaustion around the whole operation, but the tour ended abruptly due to a terrible personal tragedy.
This was the death of Robert Plant's son.
Yes. In July 1977, as the band checked into a hotel in New Orleans for a show, Plant received a phone call with the news that his 5-year-old son, Karak, had died suddenly from a stomach virus.
This is devastating.
Unimaginable. The tour was immediately canceled. Plant went into seclusion on his farm in Wales, and there was widespread speculation that the band would not, and perhaps could not, survive something like that.
They did regroup eventually to record In Through the Outdoor in 1978.
They did. It was recorded at Polar Studios in Sweden, which was ABBA's studio of all places. This album was sonically dominated by John Paul Jones.
Why was that?
This was largely because, by many accounts, Page and Bonham were dealing with their own personal substance issues and were less present in the sessions. Jones stepped up with a lot of synthesizer and keyboard-driven material.
A very different sound for them.
Very. It was commercially successful. It hit #1, but critics and many fans were divided on the new, more polished sound. It felt very different from their earlier work.
They returned to the stage in the UK in 1979 for the Knebworth Festival.
Yes. They played 2 massive headline shows in August 1979 at Knebworth. It was seen as a major comeback. They then undertook a brief stripped-down tour of Europe in 1980, sort of a warm-up for another planned U.S. tour.
But there were signs of trouble on that tour.
There were. During a show in Nuremberg, Germany, John Bonham collapsed on stage a few songs into the set. The band claimed it was due to overeating, but press speculation immediately pointed to alcohol and lifestyle issues.
And this leads us to September 1980, the events that effectively ended Led Zeppelin.
It's a very sad end to the story. The band was at Brace Studios preparing for that upcoming North American tour. On September 24th, 1980, John Bonham was picked up to go to rehearsals.
And he began drinking very heavily that day.
Exceptionally heavily, even for him. The reports state that at breakfast he consumed 4 quadruple vodkas with a ham roll. He continued drinking steadily throughout the day at the rehearsal.
And after the rehearsal,
They eventually retired to Jimmy Page's house in Windsor. Bonham fell asleep on a sofa. The next afternoon, on September 25th, John Paul Jones and their tour manager, Benji Lefebvre, went to wake him and found him unresponsive.
he had died.
He was gone.
The cause of death was determined pretty quickly.
Yes. The coroner's verdict was accidental death. The specific cause was asphyxiation from vomit. He had consumed a massive amount of alcohol. He was only 32 years old.
The remaining members then had a decision to make. And on December 4, 1980, they issued a public statement.
It was a simple, short, and definitive statement, signed simply, Led Zeppelin. It said that the loss of their dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by themselves and their manager had led them to decide that they could not continue as they were.
So they disbanded.
They did. They felt they could not be Led Zeppelin without John Bonham. For them, the 4 members were the band. It wasn't a brand name with interchangeable parts.
In the years immediately following the breakup, there were some projects and some ill-fated attempted reunions.
There were. In 1982, they released Coda, which was a collection of unreleased tracks and outtakes. Robert Plant launched a very successful solo career, first with the Honey Drippers, and then moving into his own distinct sound. Page scored some films.
And the first reunion happened at Live Aid in 1985.
It did. Page, Plant, and Jones performed with 2 drummers, Phil Collins and Tony Thompson, and it was, by all accounts, a disaster.
Why so?
It was severely under-rehearsed. Page's guitar was badly out of tune for much of the set, and Plant's voice was hoarse from his solo tour. Plant later called the performance an atrocity, and Page called it shambolic. It was not a fitting return.
They tried again a few years later for the Atlantic Records 40th anniversary concert in 1988.
This time with Jason Bonham, John's son, on drums, which felt more appropriate. But again, the performance was disjointed. There are stories that Plant and Page were arguing about playing Stairway to Heaven right before they went on stage. It was another disappointment.
Then in the 1990s, things got a bit more complicated with the relationships between the members. Page and Plant reunited, but without John Paul Jones.
That's right. In 1994, they launched the Unleaded project for MTV, which resulted in the album No Quarter. They reimagined Zeppelin songs with an Egyptian orchestra and toured the world. It was a huge success.
John Paul Jones was hurt by his exclusion.
He was, and he made it known. When Led Zeppelin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, the tension on stage was palpable. During his acceptance speech, Jones looked directly at Page and Plant and joked, "Thank you, my friends, for finally remembering my phone number."
Ouch.
A very pointed comment.
Page and Plant released an album of new material, Walking into Clarksdale, in 1998, but that partnership dissolved shortly after. It wasn't until 2007 that a proper, full-scale, one-off reunion finally happened.
This was the Ahmet Ertegun tribute concert at the O2 Arena in London on December 10th, 2007. Ahmet Ertegun was the founder of Atlantic Records and a great champion of the band.
And Jason Bonham was on drums again.
Yes. But this time, they took it very, very seriously. They rehearsed extensively for weeks. The public demand for tickets was unprecedented.
How many requests?
20 million requests for tickets were submitted online through a lottery system. It set a Guinness World Record for the highest demand for tickets for one music concert.
And the performance itself.
It was critically acclaimed across the board. They were tight, powerful, and seemed to be genuinely enjoying it. The show was professionally filmed and later released as the concert film Celebration Day in 2012.
After that triumph, everyone expected a full world tour to follow.
Page, Jones, and Jason Bonham were all willing and eager to do it, but Robert Plant refused.
Why not?
He was committed to a successful project with Alison Krauss and his own musical exploration. He felt that going back to being the frontman of Led Zeppelin for a huge tour would be a step backward for him artistically. He didn't want to become a nostalgia act.
So Page and Jones tried to continue without him.
Briefly, they auditioned other singers, famously including Steven Tyler from Aerosmith and Miles Kennedy, but ultimately they abandoned the project in January 2009. It just wasn't the same.
Moving into the more recent history, the 2010s saw a massive archival campaign.
They did. Jimmy Page spent years meticulously remastering the entire Led Zeppelin discography. Starting in 2014, they released deluxe editions of all the studio albums.
And these came with bonus material.
A lot of it. Each one came with a companion audio disc featuring unreleased alternate mixes, backing tracks, and early versions of songs. It was a comprehensive and well-received overhaul of their entire catalog for fans to explore.
And that brings us more or less up to the present day in this major documentary project.
It does. In 2020, it was confirmed that the band was participating in an official biographical documentary for the very first time. It's titled Becoming Led Zeppelin.
And it focuses on the early years.
Primarily, yes. From their individual session days up through the release of Led Zeppelin 2. A work-in-progress version was shown at the Venice Film Festival in 2021, but the completed film is now set to premiere in IMAX in February 2025.
This is significant because the band has historically been very, very protective of their image and wary of filmmakers.
Extremely, so their participation makes this a major event for their legacy.
I want to pivot now, if we can, to their artistry. We labeled them as heavy metal progenitors at the start, but their sound was so much more diverse than that label implies.
Absolutely. Their foundation was without a doubt American blues. Artists like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Skip James, you can hear this clearly all over the first two albums.
But there was another key ingredient.
There was. They also had a profound connection to the British folk revival. Jimmy Page was heavily influenced by acoustic guitarists like Bert Jansch and John Fahey. This created what Page himself always called light and shade.
The dynamic contrast.
Precisely. He believed the heavy parts sounded even heavier because they were contrasted with these delicate, intricate acoustic passages. You see this dynamic perfectly in a song like Stairway to Heaven, which builds from a simple recorder and acoustic guitar intro to a full-blown hard rock climax.
And lyrically, Robert Plant brought a very different flavor to rock music at the time.
Plant's lyrics evolved significantly. Early on, they were rooted in traditional blues tropes, sexual conquest, unrequited love. But he began incorporating mythology, mysticism, and history into his writing.
He was inspired by the Welsh landscape.
Very much so. And also by J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Songs like The Battle of Evermore and Ramble On contain direct, unmistakable references to Tolkien's work.
And this added a layer of fantasy to the music?
It did, and it resonated deeply with their audience, even if it also fueled some of the more persistent rumors about the band's alleged interest in the occult.
Those rumors were quite persistent for a long time.
They were. Page had a known interest in the occult and the writings of Aleister Crowley, and he even bought Crowley's former house on Loch Ness. This led to accusations of backmasking, hidden satanic messages in the recordings when played backward.
Which the band always denied.
The band and most credible critics have generally dismissed these claims as absurd, but it certainly added to the dangerous mythic allure of the band in the 1970s.
We should also touch on the individual contributions. It really wasn't just the Page and Plant show.
No, not at all. It was a true four-way chemistry. John Bonham's drumming is often cited as the greatest in rock history. He had immense power, but he also had a swing and a groove that came from his love of soul and jazz music. He wasn't just a heavy hitter.
And John Paul Jones was the secret weapon.
He really was. His bass lines were incredibly melodic and complex, often acting as a counter melody to the guitar. And his keyboard arrangements on songs like Kashmir and No Quarter fundamentally expanded the band's sonic texture. He was a classically trained musician who brought a high level of sophistication to all the arrangements.
So finally, let's look at their legacy. It is just vast.
It's unavoidable. They are a part of what's often called the unholy trinity of British hard rock, alongside Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. But their influence spans generations and genres.
You have the direct descendants.
Right. The bands in hard rock and metal like Aerosmith, Queen, Rush, and Megadeth. But then you also have the alternative rock movement of the 90s. Bands like Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Pearl Jam were all huge fans, and you can hear Zeppelin's influence in their dynamics.
And it goes beyond rock music.
It does. Even pop artists like Madonna, Shakira, and Lady Gaga have cited them as major influences, either musically or in terms of their stage presence and grandiosity.
And they changed the music industry itself.
They pioneered the concept of album-oriented rock, or AOR. They proved you could fill stadiums and sell millions of records without a string of top 40 hit singles. They helped create the template for the modern rock god persona and the massive stadium spectacle that we see today.
It really is a remarkable story of talent, timing, and influence that continues to resonate today.
It is. Their music, as Jimmy Page once described it, was lyrical without lyrics. It conveys a certain power and an emotion that just seems to capture new listeners in every single generation.
Thanks for listening.